New destinations and cultures, making fresh friends and creating memories that will last a lifetime.
That's why at the Travel Show, we're expanding our horizons too. And wherever we go,
we want you to come with us. Now that might make for an awful lot of excess baggage, but we think you're worth it.
The Travel Show on BBC News.
Stories of success, stories of failure, stories of strength, stories of corruption, stories of hope, stories of despair, stories of optimism, resilience, achievement, triumph. Remarkable stories from different places around the world. Join us for a series of stunning award-winning documentaries. Why Stories on BBC News.
Now on BBC News, the biggest African and international news stories. Focus on Africa.
Live from Nairobi, this is Focus on Africa on BBC News. Our top stories. Desperate to escape the fighting, tens of thousands of people are still making the dangerous journey out of Sudan. We have a special report from the border with Ethiopia.
Daily arrivals have averaged between 800 and 1,000 for weeks now. People from more than 50 countries, including Ethiopian and Sudanese nationals, have come here.
And as clashes intensify between the rival military forces, Sudan's former finance minister tells us he fears for the country's future.
This could actually, if not stopped, could spiral into a large-scale violence, a civil war, that could actually eventually threaten to partition to splinter the country.
The violence in Senegal subsides, but not the anger sparked by last week's sentencing of the opposition leader Ousmane Sonko. We look at the deeper causes of the protests. Also in the program, as Uganda mourns 54 of its soldiers killed in Somalia by Al-Shabaab, we ask, does this latest attack expose the vulnerability of the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia? Well, thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa. I'm Waihiga Mwaura. Fighting between rival factions of the military in Sudan appears to have intensified in the capital, Khartoum, after the collapse of the latest ceasefire. This is black smoke rising above the city rooftops today, with reports of intense bombardment and anti-aircraft gunfire. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing to try and get the two sides to agree to another pause in the fighting. Now, it's difficult to put a number on the people who've already fled Sudan, but we do know that it's a growing humanitarian crisis. Ethiopia is one of those neighboring countries where tens of thousands of refugees are crossing the border looking for safety. The country, though, is still dealing with the effects of the brutal civil war that only ended last year. The BBC's Kalkidan Yibeltal has been to the border town of Metima to see how they are coping.
This is the border between Ethiopia and Sudan. It's through that road, crossing that bridge, that tens of thousands of people have arrived here for the past 2 months. Daily arrivals have averaged between 800 and 1,000 for weeks now. People from more than 50 countries, including Ethiopian and Sudanese nationals, have come here. Conflict surrounds the lives of many people crossing borders separating these two countries. Just 3 years ago, a first tide of Ethiopians fleeing the violent civil war in Tigray region arrived in Sudanese territory. Now, a new conflict between rival military gangs in Sudan has pushed an estimated 1 million people to flee their homes. And more than 20,000 are thought to have crossed this border. The journey in from Khartoum is known to be dangerous, with many smugglers and human traffickers operating along the way, exploiting stranded and vulnerable refugees. Loa Muse, an Eritrean refugee, lived in Khartoum for 5 years before the war broke out. She arrived in Metama in early May and has been volunteering for the UN as a Tigrinya language translator for new arrivals.
Coming to the border of Ethiopia is never part of my plan. This is never part of my plan. I just came here just for me to survive, to stay alive. There are smugglers on the way because of the situation in Khartoum. There are smugglers everywhere. When we reached Gaddarf, we were like 15 or something. So they followed us and they knew that we were Habesha, Eritreans and Ethiopians in one bus. They took us to the wilderness. They told us that, no, we are the Red Cross. The women need to sleep right here. The men need to sleep this side. They said that. So we refused it. And then after a lot of disagreement, he took us to Gaddarf. We slept on the streets.
The UN human rights chief says he is alarmed by growing reports of sexual violence in the conflict.
Very deeply troubling reports of sexual violence in Khartoum and Darfur have emerged. We are aware at least of 25 cases, but we also know how difficult it is to document these cases, so we are sure that the real number of cases is much higher.
When we met Dr. Barecha Alemu, a physician treating new arrivals, he had been in Metama for just 5 days and had already treated 14 victims of sexual violence.
Victims of sexual assault is actually one of the cases that we are treating, and it's helping. So when they come here, they are really very traumatized, and more of them were screaming, and we tried to stabilize them, and after counseling with our professionals, we took them to the health center, and they were given some prophylaxis, especially for the treatable conditions.
The UN is expanding its camp transit centers in Metama to accommodate a new wave of arrivals expected in the coming weeks. The wounds of Ethiopia's civil war are yet to heal. And now, the country is feeling the impacts of yet another conflict involving its neighbors. Kalkidan Ibeltal, BBC News, Metama.
For those who were once at the epicenter of Sudanese politics, but now no longer in Sudan, watching events unfold across the country is a bitter pill. Ibrahim El-Badawi is a former finance minister. He was part of the transitional cabinet formed after the overthrow of Omar al-Bashir. Now, he's currently the managing director of the Economic Research Forum, which promotes economic research across the region. I spoke to him earlier, and he told me that he has real fears for the future of Sudan.
This could actually, if not stopped, could spiral into a large-scale violence, a civil war, that could actually eventually threaten to splinter the country because unfortunately that is usually what happens, is that when you have a civil war in an ethnically divided societies like ours, or tribal with tribal affiliations and so on, so we cannot rule out, in fact, the risk is very distinct possibility that we might deteriorate into that kind of violence, large-scale violence.
As a trained economist, I'm keen to get your sense on the state of the economy right now. We are told that the war has frozen international trading business in Sudan, cargo ships stuck at the port of Sudan, traders unable to send money to pay for some of the goods that are coming in on some of those ships as well. What does this mean for Sudan's food security?
My estimate is that this 1 month, slightly more than 1 month, of large-scale violence, of high-intensity violence in the capital and major cities, I think probably have already destroyed 20% of the already impoverished Sudanese national product. It destroys supply chain because of the closure of the routes from the Port Sudan to the rest of the country. It actually destroyed the assets of the economy in the capital. The economy of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, the greater Khartoum, probably account for more than 30% of the national domestic product. So this, in addition to other intangible impact, such as straining the institution of the government, destroying social capital between communities and tribes and regions, And of course, the destruction that happens to both sides in terms of the assets, the military assets itself, that's supposed to protect the sovereignty of the country and the borders of the country. So this is really a huge calamity.
Talk to us a little bit about Sudan's history. Some have cited political instability, infighting, and humanitarian crisis. How would the nation's past affect this current crisis, in your view?
Yeah, unfortunately, despite the fact that Sudan was held in very optimistic perspective, and back in 1953, the Newsweek cover page featured Sudan as, quote, a promising country in a dark continent, unquote. But the reality that Sudan, unfortunately, turned out to be defined by conflicts, dysfunctional governance, and failed development experiences. The reason being is because as Sudanese, we fail to manage social diversity. Sudan is a highly fractionalized society, even polarized society, especially when Sudan included both North and South. But even after the partitioning of the country in 2011, Sudan continues to be a highly polarized society.
Solutions, short-term, long-term, briefly, what do they look like from where you sit?
I think it is very important that actually both sides now realize that there won't be a military winner, and there is almost a de facto balance of power between the two military protagonists. So the best thing is actually to exercise wisdom and patriotism on both sides. But then also, I think it is also important to investigate the reason why this violent conflict started. There are people or groups spoiling for a conflict and fanning the flame of this conflict, and they should be held accountable and consequences, legal and political consequences, has to be imposed on this group that has been disrupting and playing a subversive role against the democratic process in Sudan.
Ibrahim El-Badawi joined us earlier from Washington with those thoughts. Now, protests in Senegal are continuing for a fourth day, although the streets of the capital, Dakar, appear to be calmer. At least 16 people have died following the conviction of the opposition leader Ousmane Sonko on Thursday. In response, the government shut down the internet and social media yesterday. But how and why did this all start? The BBC's Ian Wafula takes a closer look.
This is what the last 3 days have looked like in Senegal's capital. There's tension everywhere after protests on the street of Dakar and other parts of the country turned deadly. Social media and messaging apps have been blocked by authorities and shut. More than 500 people have been arrested. This is all because one man was sentenced to 2 years in jail. I'm talking about opposition leader Ousmane Sonko. He was acquitted on charges on the rape of a woman at a massage parlor in 2021. However, he was convicted of the charge of corrupting the youth, which includes using one position of power to have sex with people under the age of 21. He didn't attend the trial, and its supporters have called it a witch hunt, which authorities have denied. So who is he, and how did we get here? Ousmane Sonko is a 48-year-old former tax inspector turned politician. In 2019, he came in third during Senegal's presidential election. Since then, his popularity has grown, especially among young people who feel disillusioned about finding work and see him as a solution to their problems. Unemployment currently runs at around 17%, with young people particularly affected. Sonko has also accused President Macky Sall of planning to stay in office for an unconstitutional third term. According to the Senegalese constitution, presidents are limited to 2 terms in power. However, Mr. Sall has not yet announced his intentions. With political tensions rising across the country, Mr. Sall invited opposition parties to talks last week. Sonko's party refused to attend. This is not the first time tensions have run as high. When Sonko was arrested in 2021 for disrupting public order, clashes left at least a dozen people dead.
Well, let's now bring in journalist and political analyst Mamadou Chio from Dakar to tell us more. Mamadou, thanks for making time for the program. What's the situation like today in the capital?
Yeah, thanks for having me. The situation right now is calmer, as you said it, but I mean, things can change quickly because there is, at the time I'm talking to you live, there's a call for people to gather at the Independence Square, which is not far from the presidential palace. And then the party of Usman Sonko, the PASTEF party, made it clear that that he want President Macky Sall to step down. So they released a communique, a press release, saying that now they want people, Senegalese, to join them in this fight, and then to see Macky Sall not even, finishing his current term, which is finishing next February next year. And President Macky Sall himself is meeting the leadership, the political leadership of his party in a few minutes. Because I mean, due to the situation, he want to meet all these people. I mean, all these political people who is working in the what we call his party, the Alliance for the Republic. They'll be meeting at the headquarters. So this is the situation right now.
Okay, thanks for that quick update. Now, the internet and social media have been shut down by the government. What does this say about the state of the freedom of expression in Senegal today?
So many people, to be frank, are mad with this shutting down of the internet because when you look at even Senegals who have not been to school, they know how to use the social media. So that's why since yesterday, Sunday, when this information came out, people are mad because they cannot use. They phone mostly. It is on the internet on the phone, and most people are using the internet in that way. That's why some people are even fearing that this decision of the government can bring more and more Senegalese to be mad at the.
Well, we seem to have lost the sound of Mamadou Tiora, a political analyst and journalist who was joining us from Dakar, but those are some of his thoughts, even as we continue to follow the situation in Senegal. Now, still to come, another attack on AU troops in Somalia, this time targeting Ugandans. How vulnerable is the peacekeeping mission in Somalia?
When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on BBC Weather.
Watches are an amazing segment to express a brand identity, to showcase craftsmanship, to tell amazing stories, to work on innovation, and innovation is a very strong element of the DNA of the brand.
Watchmaking continues to innovate, continues to bring modernity to this ancestral know-how. We see the interest in younger generations for the object of timepieces.
Creation is about proposing something to the customers that they don't think they want, and that's the idea.
The watch, the mechanical watch, has become a piece of art, and I think you really buy through an important emotional aspect.
Luxury, I think, is an experience, and I think sustainability should be part of that experience nowadays.
Welcome back to Focus on Africa. They panicked. These are the sharp words from Uganda's president aimed at his own soldiers that may still be ringing in their ears. Last week, hundreds of Al-Shabaab militants stormed Uganda's African Union mission base in Somalia, killing 54 Ugandan soldiers, including a commander. Now, this was one of the deadliest raids on the African Union peacekeeping bases in recent months. Yoweri Museveni has since softened his position, praising the troops for their remarkable resilience. Ugandan soldiers have been in Somalia since March 2007. Troops there have come under attack several times, as well as last week. There was an assault in May this year. Across Somalia, there are some 20,000 troops under the current African Union peacekeeping mission. As well as Uganda, there are soldiers from Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Kenya. The US also has military personnel across Somalia. Now, Uganda has one of the largest contingents with the African Union Peacekeeping Mission, or ATMIS. But what do Ugandans make of their troops in Somalia? Let's now get more from Wilfred Nasongo, who's a resident fellow on foreign policy and security from the Global Center for Policy and Strategy. Thanks for making time for Focus on Africa, Wilfred. And I just want to understand where Ugandans see this. Are they in support of their troops' deployment in Somalia?
Thank you very much for focusing on Africa. I would say this, that, you know, there's something they call foreign internal defense. All these states that have sent their troops, the troop contributing countries, they're doing it for the purposes of security at home. If you can remember very well, Uganda, Kampala, attacks, and Kenya. There was bombing that was leveled against Al-Shabaab. But I can say this very fast, that maybe you may think that Ugandans feel they have been let down, but I would say that everybody feels he has been let down. The president feels that he has been let down. The parents of those soldiers, I think actually is the pressure that has made the president to retract. The soldiers themselves, the terrain within which they are operating, the doctrine and whatever, the support from around there, let them down.
And obviously the question I'm sure many of our viewers are asking is, does this attack then expose the vulnerability of ATMIS forces in Somalia?
You know, we may say that it does so to some level, but it's not a new thing. Remember, ATMIS is a transition mission, picking on from AMISOM, the African Union mission. And if we look at from 2015 should be said that it was the worst time. You know, we had 2 attacks on Burundi soldiers, 54 again. And then even the Ugandans themselves were attacked, I think 19. Then the worst 2016, you remember Al-Ade, the Kenyans, over 100. So we can say that not so much I'm an Afro-optimist, and I would say that the path that the African Union has covered through its own peace support operations up to the transition mission is greater than the negative path that we can look at. But then still, you are right, you have observed that correctly, that it has totally exposed at this time when we are thinking that we should be now scaling down. I think even the transition plan is that by December this year, 2000, should have been degraded or left. And then we are looking at a mission up to 2024. And then we exit. So yes.
Yes. So what can be done? Because some are looking at scenarios such as, should ATMIS forces exit, would the Somalia National Army have the capacity to fill the gap?
On Somalia National Army, I can say no. They do not have the capacity. One, what's the reason? One, you know, we have multiple doctrines being fed to them. This is called the security sector reform. You'll find UAE there training, Somalia National Army. You'll find even the US as a hand there. You find the African states, Uganda itself. So what doctrine are they running as a military group? So again, if you can observe very well, the Somali National Army is one of the most infiltrated by the Al-Shabaab. So at this time, the joy of everything is that as we feel discouraged at what will happen, there'll be a hiatus if ATMIS leaves, is that the frontline states will be deployed.
Will be deployed.
That is
so let me ask you this and tell me this briefly. How can security and stability be achieved with what we now know?
Yes. In Somalia, what they need to do is around 4 or 3 things. That one of them is we learn the lessons that we have gotten from the tactics of Al-Shabaab, that those small, we call them force operating bases, detached and maybe taking care of small areas, should have surveillance, multiple operations from maybe helicopters and the rest.
Okay, and
then
the second point? Yes.
The second point is we fix the politics in Somalia. And to fix this as two avenues. That one is a regional politics. Even as we look at the frontline states, we're seeing regional and even extra-regional politics driving Somalia as it does.
Okay.
But the second fix of politics is negotiation. We are looking at mediation. The world over, the base of peace now is mediation. Even the US did that.
And I'll stop you there, Wilfred Nasongo. Thank you so much. Interesting perspectives that you brought our way today. Now, before we go, the sharp-eyed among you would have noticed that Focus on Africa has a new look, a new style, and is now live from Nairobi. As part of the changes to our flagship programs, including this one, you can now expect more digital formats, African expertise, and high-quality content from our production teams here and in London. Well, earlier on, I took a walk around our bureau just for you. Here is what the new home of Focus on Africa looks like. It's been 11 amazing years of Focus on Africa live from London, but the show is coming home to the African continent, to Nairobi, Kenya. Join me as we embark on this exciting journey. This is part of the exceptional Focus on Africa team, dedicated to taking you beyond mere news updates. They're focusing on in-depth analysis, explainers, and fact-checking, and also not forgetting those unforgettable interviews with leaders and youthful changemakers.
In 3, 2, 1, and cue.
And I had to show you the engine room, the center of operations for Focus on Africa. From here, the signal will be beamed to every corner of the globe, connecting us with audiences worldwide. Well, finally, from one of the biggest studios outside, of course, and this is what will be happening right here. Now, feel free to get in touch with us, me and some of the team on social media at Waihiga Mwaura. Thanks for joining us, however. That's all from the program. From me and the whole team, it's goodbye.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there. Conditions have improved somewhat across Victoria and New South Wales. We've lost the rain which we had earlier in the week. Some sunshine around, temperatures up to 22 Celsius in Adelaide, around 19 or 20 in Sydney for Tuesday afternoon. 27 Celsius for Shanghai, to the south of here into much of southern China. Plenty of heavy rain.